These most overlooked and game-changing stats can completely shake up your all-time greatest NBA players list. It highlights what makes each of these players so special. These are numbers that you never hear from the mainstream media. It's more than just a number of titles or MVPs they won. We're going deep into these players' careers, and it can either significantly move them up or down on your list. Make sure to comment on other overlooked stats from any of the players we're going to discuss. Let's first start with Hakeem Olajuwon. For many people, this is the modern version of Wilt Chamberlain. The numbers he would record on a consistent basis could only compare to him. But what puts him in the GOAT conversation is that he's also the modern version of Bill Russell. These are two of the most dominant defensive players ever. Check out this unbelievable stat from Hakeem. He is the only player to finish first in defensive rating for 5 straight years. This occurred from the 1986-87 season to the 1990-91 season. What makes that even more impressive is that he finished first among other defensive stats during that stretch. He finished first in defensive win shares for the 1986-87 season to the 1989-90 season, first in blocks in 1990 and 1991, first in rebounds in 1989 and 1990, and first in defensive box plus minus in 1990 and 1991. He was unquestionably the best defensive player during an era full of great defensive stoppers. When you add that to his incredible offensive skill, then you may want to rethink where he lands on your list. Now let's talk about Dr. Julius Erving. When we think of this iconic player, the first thing that comes to mind is his high-flying dunks. But he was much more than just a flashy player. He knew exactly what it took to win at the highest level. It's something that could be compared to one of the most respected dynasties, the Tim Duncan-led San Antonio Spurs. From the 1976-77 season, his first year with the Sixers, to the 1985-86 season, the team averaged 56 wins per season. That includes 1 title in 4 finals appearances and 2 other trips to the conference finals. If we compare that to what the Spurs accomplished, they averaged 57.6 wins from 2000 to 2009. The Sixers averaged only 1 fewer victory. It's extremely hard for a team to stay dominant for over a decade. And that's even tougher when you don't play with a top 75 teammate for 6 years. Imagine if he was paired with Moses Malone right from the beginning. This proves that there was much more to this legend than just the dunks. Speaking of Tim Duncan, let's talk about an extremely underrated stat for his 19-year playing career. He is known as one of the league's greatest winners, and the numbers back that up. He finished his career with a 71 win percentage. That is not only the NBA's best win percentage, but also the best in the NFL, MLB, and NHL. His team never won less than 50 games in a season. In the 1999 lockout season, the Spurs had a 74 win percentage, which means they would have won a little over 60 games in a normal 82 game schedule. But he didn't just have success in the regular season. In the playoffs, it was almost a guarantee that he would at least reach the conference finals. He went that far 9 times. So that means that for nearly half of his career, he was able to lead his team to at least the conference finals. It's one thing to have longevity, and it's another to contend for a title for nearly 2 decades straight. Let's move on to Steph Curry. It's no secret that he's known as the greatest three-point shooter in league history. He has countless records that one could rattle off. But there's one that gives us an idea of how much of the separation between him and everyone else. For most players, converting on 10 three-pointers in a game is considered one of the highlights of their careers. There are plenty that have done it once, but only a few that have done it multiple times. Check out the top 5 players with the most games with over 10 three-pointers made. James Harden, Zach LaVine, and J.R. Smith are tied for 3. Damian Lillard has 8 such games. Klay Thompson has done it 10 times. Then there's Steph Curry, who has done it 26 times. That is only 1 less than the other 5 players combined. That is extremely impressive when you consider that we're currently in an era where everyone is jacking up threes. There are players like Trae Young, who has never hit that many threes in a game. This is proof once again that there's Steph, and then there's everyone else. Let's talk about the player that is the exact opposite of Curry, Shaquille O'Neal. He might have taken himself out of the GOAT conversation, but he firmly believes that no one was more dominant. That was especially true in the biggest moments. Let's take a look at the players with the most 40-point games in the finals. There are only 14 players that have done it multiple times. Among those 14 players, there are only 2 centers. That's George Mikan and Shaq. He's done it 5 times, which is the 4th most. What's interesting is that legendary big men such as Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem have never done it more than once. Not even elite scorers such as Kobe Bryant have done it multiple times. But there was no big man that asserted their will in the finals better than him. In fact, he averaged a combined 28.8 points per game on 60% shooting for the finals. There is no one among the top 30 for the most career points in the finals that's averaged over 60%. You could always count on the Diesel to come up big when you needed him the most. Naturally, we move on to the player that is also worthy of the MDE title, Wilt Chamberlain. He gets so much credit for the monstrous numbers that he would regularly produce, but not so much in the way he impacted winning for his team. Many people don't know that he was responsible for the greatest turnaround season we've ever seen from a team. That's not just including the number of wins. We've seen other players such as Kareem, Larry Bird, David Robinson, and Steve Nash that led their teams to a huge turnaround. But what Wilt accomplished in the 1963-64 season was different. In the previous year, the San Francisco Warriors finished with the 3rd worst record in the league. In the following season, they had the 3rd best record. Even without making a single offseason move, the Warriors were able to reach the finals with nearly the exact same roster. The difference was the way Chamberlain tweaked his game to impact his team. Only he could carry a bad squad all the way to the finals. Let's take a break from the big men and move on to Larry Bird. He is mostly famous for his exceptional all-around play. What a lot of people get wrong about him is that he was a defensive liability. That couldn't be farther from the truth. The numbers say that he was extremely valuable on that end of the floor. There were 4 seasons where he led the league in defensive win shares. The only players who have done it as many times are Bill Russell, Tim Duncan, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Dwight Howard. That cannot be a coincidence. I would describe his defensive style as that of a safety. Some players are like cornerbacks who are great at individual defense. Larry was like a free safety in the sense that he was all over the place. He was fantastic at help defense and putting himself in the right spot to make a stop. Here's how much impact he had on the team's defense in just his rookie year. They went from having the 3rd worst defensive rating to the 4th best. If you're under the impression that he had any weaknesses in his game, think again. What about his biggest rival, Magic Johnson? Everyone knows that what made him such a transcendent player was his creative passing abilities. But what separates him from other great point guards is the way he could completely dominate a game without scoring in bunches. That's especially the case in the playoffs. Let's take for instance the number of times he dished out over 20 assists in a playoff game. In all of history, there have only been 20 instances. Magic has done it 10 times. He's even tied with the most assists for a playoff game with 24. What's even more impressive is that in 3 of those occasions, he did in the finals. No one else has been able to have that many assists in the finals game. It takes a certain level of skill to control a playoff intensity game with your passing. None of the players that we mentioned here are even close to reaching his level. Let's transition to Bill Russell. His claim to fame is his historically great defensive abilities. He changed the game with the way he protected the paint. We also know about the 11 championships he won. He is the greatest winner in NBA history. But that's not the only stat that proves this. The numbers say that he's the greatest clutch performer in sports history. Did you know that Bill Russell's teams participated in 21 winner-take-all contests? That includes 9 NCAA tournament games, 1 Olympic gold medal game, 10 Game 7s, and 1 deciding Game 5. And Bill Russell's team won all 21. For this discussion, we'll only focus on his games in the NBA. For those 11 games, he averaged a combined 18.4 points on 47% shooting, 29.5 rebounds, and 4.4 assists per game. He faced Wilt 4 times, Jerry West and Elgin Baylor 3 times, Bob Pettit twice, and Oscar Robertson once in such games. None of them could figure out how to defeat Bill Russell when it mattered the most. Let's move on to Kobe Bryant. There aren't many players that was a more dangerous one-on-one scorer. His skills were so refined that he continued to perform at a high level as he entered the twilight of his career. In the 2012-13 season, which was his 17th year, he was selected to the All-NBA First Team. Here's how rare this is. Only Kareem has been selected with such an honor after their 17th year. This occurred in the 1985-86 season. But here's a difference in the numbers between the two. That's not to mention that Kobe was clearly the best player on the team, while Magic Johnson was the Lakers' best player in 1986. Kobe was determined to prolong his prime as long as possible, and he somehow kept improving. If it wasn't for the Achilles injury he suffered later that year, who knows what else he could have accomplished. It's safe to assume that he would have broken so many records. Speaking of Kareem, what can we say about him? What we associate most with him is his sky hook. We know that's the most unstoppable move in NBA history, and the numbers back that up. Did you know there were 9 playoff series where he shot over 60% from the field while averaging over 20 points per game? Who's the only player that could match with that? Shaquille O'Neal, who also had that many playoff series while posting those numbers. Shaq was able to do that with his physical nature. Kareem did it with his finesse. On top of that, he has 2 of the 3 highest field goal percentages while averaging over 30 points per game for a season. It seems like Giannis Antetokounmpo could take his spot after the end of this season, but he has yet to be that efficient in the same number of times as Kareem was in the playoffs. That played a big role in Kareem being known as one of the most dependable playoff performers. Let's transition to LeBron James. What we're going to highlight here is his insane ability to carry a team to the finals. There have been some players that have accomplished some impressive carry jobs. It's rare for a player to lead their team to the finals without any of their teammates averaging over 15 points per game for the playoffs. Players such as Hakeem Olajuwon and Tim Duncan are one of the few to accomplish this. But no one other than LeBron has done it more than once. In 2007 and 2018, he was able to carry his team to the finals without anyone else to help alleviate the scoring load. And finally, we have Michael Jordan. The numbers say that no one was more dominant of a scorer. That's especially the case in the playoffs. For example, he's had 28 playoff series where he's averaged over 30 points per game. That's more than what LeBron and Wilt have done combined for their careers. On top of that, there have only been 8 players that have had multiple 50-point games in the playoffs. Jordan crushes the competition with 8 total. If that's not impressive enough, he would finish among the top 15 for the most 50-point games if we only account for his playoff games. It's tough to score that many points when you're playing playoff intensity basketball. For him to do it that many times in a defensive era proves that he's on another level. Now what about you all? Is there any other overlooked stats that you could think of to defend your GOAT pick? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.